Hello, it's me, Brian, again. A couple of people have asked me to do a little piece on research, not in the academic sense, but research in terms of social media and how to kind of protect ourselves from conspiracy theories and such like, or false data. Basically, though, it's very much like academic research. In academic research, there's two things that we focus on. One is credibility and one is context. So from a credibility point of view, we're talking about who published this. So in academic sense, we use a lot of journals, academic journals, and we really don't rely, obviously, as you'd expect, on things like social media posts or blogs or something like that. With regards to context, that's also important because, let's face it, if you look at the American cultural context, it's quite different from the European cultural context. The European cultural context doesn't necessarily mean that it's a homogenous whole, and so British is different from French. So it's always really important to understand the context in which the point or post was being made. So basically, to simplify that a little bit, do think about who it was that published it. Not your friend, but where your friend got it from. Okay, so the original source of that quote. Now, quite often that will be suggested. People say, well, that's the ad hominem argument, that you're attacking the person and not the argument, not the theory, as it were. That is true. So, for example, if you said Brian doesn't know what he's talking about, look at him, look at his beard, he's clearly a fool. That's an ad hominem argument, okay? However, if you were to say, I'm not going to take any advice on childcare from Jimmy Savile, that is not ad hominem, okay? That is a perfectly legitimate position. Similar thing with the Andrew Wakefield guy, or whatever, the MMR guy, yeah? You don't need to listen to anything he talks about with regards to vaccinations. Now, since he was basically struck off and no longer allowed to practice medicine, he's made most of his money by being part of the anti-vax movement. He doesn't do any such research on anti-vaccinations that's been published. His original paper was lies. Okay, the data was falsified. You do not do that in science. Well, you can. People are human. People cheat. But actually, of course, if you falsify data, clearly you're going to be struck off. This is like an athlete taking drugs. Yeah, clearly you're going to be struck off. Clearly you're not going to be allowed to practice. Okay, so in that sense, again, to ignore or to say, well, no, it's coming from this source, is legitimate. He hasn't redeemed himself by publishing or by apologising or by looking at what he's saying. Say something David Icke. Anything David Icke says, okay? Don't know the man, okay? However, he thinks the Queen's a lizard. All right, he claimed to be the son of God. Maybe he was having some difficulties at that point. He needs to sort of recognise that, address that, and move forward with it. But instead, of course, he makes his money by being ridiculous, by saying ridiculous things. So that's not ad hominem, okay? Ad hominem relates only to when you're personally insulting the person. You're not calling into question their background. So, for example, if I was to start spouting on about various different sort of drugs you should take because I'm a doctor, you would be correct to say, no, you're a doctor of economics, not of medicine. Shut up, okay? That's a perfectly legitimate thing to say. My opinion is no more valid than yours, assuming you're not a medical doctor, but no more valid than yours when it comes to medicine. However, of course, if we look at aspects of economics, then obviously my experience comes into play a little bit further. Okay? But I'm still not right necessarily, so don't trust what I say. This takes us on a little bit to some of the things that we see. We see a lot of people claiming, well, this is something the mainstream media don't want you to know. Again, be very careful with that. I'm really boring. I listen to Radio 4, I listen to the Today programme, I listen to a lot of mainstream media in that sort of context. But whenever I see this on social media, I think, well, hold on a second, I heard that yesterday on the radio. Or I think to myself, well, I read that yesterday in The Guardian or The Times or The Telegraph or wherever. If someone says this is what mainstream media don't want you to know, the trick is, Google it and put in like The Times or put in news or put in BBC, and you'll quite often find that they have covered it. It's a really good argument, isn't it? This is a secret that only we know and they don't want you to know, and they're trying to cover this up. Normally it's not. It's just not very interesting. They haven't seen it on Facebook is what they mean. Okay, it hasn't appeared on your Facebook feed. That doesn't mean to say it's not in the mainstream media. You think about how much mainstream media there is. There's 24-hour news from the BBC and other channels. There is countless newspapers, magazines, journals, that sort of stuff. So it's probably been covered 9 times out of 10. Okay, when it hasn't, often it'll be because something's pushed it out of the way. So a nice royal wedding, that pushes stuff out of the way. It's not a conspiracy. It simply means that these businesses they only have so much space, volume to publish news or to broadcast news. And of course, they're trying to cater for a market and entertain people. People prefer royal weddings to kind of news about poverty. So be careful with that one. That's a bit of a flag if mainstream media don't cover it. The other thing as well, of course, is the reason mainstream media don't cover it, or the reason it's not covered by the journals or whatever, is because it's wrong. It's as simple as that, okay? Just because nobody believes you doesn't mean that you're right, okay? That's kind of what happens in films, isn't it? So the hero of the film, no one believes them, nobody trusts them, but actually they're right all along. But that's a film, that's a story. In reality, the reason why this is not a good idea is because it's not a good idea. So, do take it with a pinch of salt. Do use Google. You've got Facebook, therefore you've got Google. And one of the tricks with that, of course, is by just typing in before you hit share. Type in. A great thing to do, by the way, is to type in whatever the thing is, whatever the phrase is they're talking about, and then type the word hoax after it, and then it will bring up things for you like Snoops and whatever, and you can see whether or not someone's already investigated this and tested it for the truth and for fact checking. So that's quite a handy trick to do as well. So type into Google whatever the phrase is. So one of the ones that goes around a lot, isn't it, is this one which talks about how much money illegal immigrants get. So pensioners get like £5 a year or whatever, and illegal immigrants get £1 million a day. I'm exaggerating, but that's the sort of thing. Apart from the fact, very obviously it's wrong, because if you're an illegal immigrant, you don't get any benefits. You don't. You can't walk into the dole office and say, "Hi, I'm here illegally. Hand me a check," and they go, "Oh, damn, we've got to pay you. I wish we could pay old people instead, but because you're an illegal immigrant, I'm forced to pay you a lot of money." I don't know. Have you ever claimed benefits? You know how many forms you have to fill out? Okay, it ain't that easy. You don't get benefits if you're an illegal immigrant. But okay, maybe you didn't see that one straight away. But of course, if you type into Google, how much benefits do illegal immigrants get? And then scroll down. Don't just look at one site, look at several of them, okay? And what you'll see, of course, is someone will explain that they don't, that you can be an asylum seeker and you get a little bit of money and what have you to keep, obviously, to feed you while you're staying here and being investigated and what have you. But yeah, they don't get a fortune. So Google is your friend here, okay? Google before share. Maybe that could be the mantra. Google before share, okay? The other thing, of course, is that some of these sites are getting really clever now. So I'm going to show you one. And what the chap's done is he's been a bit crafty. Okay, so he's got really clever at trying to show you that he's done the research for you, so you don't have to. Actually, there's a couple of TV adverts that do the same thing for furniture. I've done all the research, they say. And what they're trying to hope is that you don't then. Okay, you just go and buy their stuff. So he wants you to buy his stuff because he's done all the research for you. So switch the camera around a second, hopefully. Whoops, nope, hang on, I'm having a bit of camera troubles. I'll switch around like that. Okay, so we'll try and watch this. Hopefully this will work. So you see what he's done? So that's good. Okay, he's talking about Black Lives Matter, and he's trying to prove to you that Black Lives Matter is a front for progressives, okay, and the money doesn't go to Black Lives Matter. So what he's done is he's selected Act Blue on their website, Black Lives Matter, and he's come down here, look, and he's doing a search. That's a brilliant thing. That's a really good tip. And then he jumps to Wikipedia.
Okay, we're going to go to...
Right, Wikipedia is a good source, okay, not perfect, but it's a really good start. Wikipedia is better than 100 memes, so let's not push it too far with Wikipedia, but we'll try a bit of Wikipedia. And what he does now is he reads out for you what it says, or sort of. You can read, so see, try yourself there.
Wikipedia is a non-profit organization established that enables Democrats. Progressives are communists. Look them up.
Right, progressives are communists, look them up. And of course, he's hoping that you don't look them up. Progressives, progressive is just a word to describe left or liberal organisations. It isn't synonymous and it doesn't get replaced by the word communist. Communist is, hey, well, what can we do? Do look it up, maybe that. Google it, look up and try and research what progressives are.
Groups and left-leaning non-profits to raise internet. Okay, so now we know all the money.
Right, he then says, now we know all the money doesn't go to Black Lives Matter. If you can read that, I'm sure you can read it there, it says, providing them with online fundraising software. He purposefully didn't read the rest of the sentence, which is explaining that Act Blue is a bit like GoFundMe or whatever, or Just Giving. Sorry, Just Giving. What it does is it's software. It's a website that enables you to collect money. They take a small percentage of that for processing charges. Of course they do. But basically, when you give to Black Lives Matter, it goes to Black Lives Matter. It's as simple as that. So he set up this wonderful little conspiracy. He goes on in that video to start examining Act Blue and where Act Blue's money goes. Well, it's not where Act Blue's money goes. It's where the money they have collected goes. So they have collected money. Well, they don't collect the money. They have processed the money, if you like, for various things. It's a little bit like looking at Visa or PayPal and saying, oh, all the money's going to PayPal. It's going through PayPal, yeah. It's not going to them, right? So when you use PayPal, it doesn't mean to say you're donating to PayPal and the money isn't going to Black Lives Matter or the RNLI. It's going to PayPal. Well, no, it's going through them. So, that's a really good example of where he's trying to use the words like do your research, and then he demonstrates using a credible site to do your research. But of course, he's lying. Now, what's interesting is I don't know if he's lying. In other words, he knows that is not true because he wants to discredit Black Lives Matter, or whether he's just not that bright. It's really hard to say. But effectively, if anyone says do your research, then the trick is do it. Use Google. Search. It's a really powerful tool. But do search wisely and sensibly, okay? When you do a search on Google and you find something published on a website, then search that website. And again, Wikipedia is quite a friendly one here. So search up that organization on Wikipedia and you'll see what their background is and you can see their context. So again, take your time a little bit, have a little look before you share. So Google before you share, check a little bit further. But again, be careful. You will find lots of websites that talk about, I don't know, what should we say, vaccines, for example, that vaccines cause autism. The thing is, none of them are actually credible. If you want to look about vaccines, NHS. Go to the NHS's website, read stuff from the NHS or from the British Medical Journal or from the Lancet. They made a mistake once. Well, they let someone get through the net once for a short time, but Lancet. Or from academic journals. By the way, if you type in Google Scholar, you'll get a different type of search engine come up, which just looks at academic papers. That's quite useful. But one of the problems is a lot of those papers are behind paywalls. And this is because academic journals have very, very small circulations. And so they tend to be behind quite expensive paywalls. It's not a conspiracy. If you go along to your local university library, you'll often find you can get a membership of it for a very small amount of money, and you could then get access to these journals. Okay, but it is just because it's an expensive resource. That's all. So when they say do your research, yes, do it. Okay, but equally, and this is really, 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 really important, it is on the part of the person, the author, to demonstrate their research. It's not your job. Okay, can you imagine this? Isn't it? If you went into a court of law and you said, "I'm innocent," and the prosecutors or whatever, the lawyers said, "Well, no, we suspect you have done this, and we've got some evidence here that says you've done this," and you retaliated with, "No, I haven't. Do your research." It's not really their job to do your research for you. It's not like, no. Okay, you're claiming you're innocent. Now I know you're innocent until proven guilty. What I'm saying is, give us something to work with here, okay? Rather than just you saying no. Do your research. Do your research. Do your research. So that's quite an interesting one. But certainly, again, try and find those original sources. Try and push and see. But yeah. We talked about a couple of things here: Black Lives Matter, vaccines. The left is equally guilty of these spurious arguments. Yeah, if we look at, for example, like the Rothschild family, both the left and the right are obsessed with them. It's interesting. Okay, the thing to remember about Rothschild conspiracies is these date back to a lot of anti-Semitism. The Rothschilds are Jewish, and so it's very easy to attack the Jewish bankers. I mean, that's famously probably happened for as long as there's been banking. Really, I mean, the Jewish community has lent money to kings and queens, mostly kings, for hundreds of years, and then accused them of various things as a way of avoiding paying it. That goes back into British history with some terrible events. We're equally all the way across Europe. But if you look at the Rothschilds made a fortune out of wars. So they say, well, the Rothschilds are bankers, or well, still are bankers. But they're bankers, and bankers issue bonds. In other words, bankers lend money to governments. So yeah, when governments want to fight wars, they borrow money. It's not a conspiracy. They just borrow money. They lend money to lots of people, lots of companies. So be very careful with this. They're very rich. It's very easy to be jealous of the rich. The rich do have power and control. You know what? No matter how nice a person I am, they're never going to invite me to number 10. If I was a really successful billionaire businessman, I dare say I could get an audience with number 10. I could say, I want to come in and talk to you about Brexit. I'm a bit concerned about it. I mean, let's think about it. When Brexit started, the head of Nissan in UK was straight into number 10. I wasn't. They weren't worried about what Brian thought. But this is because, of course, that with that money you get influence and power because you employ a lot of people, because you make up a chunk of the economy. It's not right. It's not fair. But it's not a conspiracy. The Rothschilds don't own central banks. The Rothschilds own quite a few banks. They're not as powerful as they used to be financially because the families, the inheritance is split so many times. But yeah, don't get too obsessed with the Rothschilds. Certainly, from a right-wing point of view, they don't like the Jewishness of them, and from a left-wing point of view, it's very easy to get into this kind of conspiracy theory about banks and about capitalism. If you want to attack capitalism, crack on. It's a good thing to attack. Certainly, the crony capitalism we have in Europe and United States, well, internationally, to be honest with you, global capitalism is a good thing to attack. But my golly, make sure you steer clear of those ad hominems in that case. Just because the Rothschilds are Jewish doesn't mean they're wrong, okay? Just because they're rich doesn't mean they're wrong. It is safe to say, though, there is something wrong with the way we practice capitalism that sees such massive gaps between poverty and wealth. Okay, that's interesting. That's about distribution, but don't go after people. There's no conspiracy. It's just the system. Likewise, Soros is another one. Soros is mostly hated by the right. Again, Soros is another Jewish individual. His position on Israel is interesting. He's pro-Jewish very much, obviously. Well, not obviously, but he is pro-Jewish, of course. He isn't anti-Semitic, but he's very critical of the Israelis' policy, Israeli government's policy. So be careful with the language here. The Israeli government's policy with regards to Palestine. So his position is quite would be sort of left or moderate or centrist from an Israeli political point of view. But he's not anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish. He just falls foul of those, particularly in the States, that have that really strong agenda, which is pro-settlements, shall we say? Yeah. So that's an interesting one. Well, worth reading a little bit more about. I'm not going to say do your research, but it's just a fine balance there. So that's how the right tend not to like him to some extent. He's quite liberal, but he's a billionaire. He made his money by doing some really sort of interesting, opaque financial deals, but that's the nature of capitalism. Capitalism allows people to do things like that, or the type of capitalism we practice. Again, it's not a conspiracy. He ended up with billions through his dealings, much of which he's given away. I think he's given away more than Donald Trump was ever worth or something, yeah? Self-made man, again, was a refugee from Nazi occupation in Europe. So, I'm not praising George Soros. I'm no connection to him. I'm just saying left and right attack people often, but it's usually that case ad hominem type arguments. Attack capitalism, don't attack the individuals there. So that's one interesting one to think about. The other one to think about, and the one I'll sort of finish on, is do be careful with experts. You see, one of the interesting things is that you can kind of trust. I mean, I don't know about the American system's different now, but if you look at the British system, if a British medical doctor was to make claims on the internet or social media that were sort of against science or questionable with regards to science, you see they run the risk of being struck off. So they're quite believable. If they come forward on television or on the radio or social media and say, I think that people should eat 3 melons a day or whatever, they're running the risk of being struck off if that's not true, losing their livelihoods if that's not true. So they can be quite reliable in that sense. But do remember, of course, one doctor doesn't represent the opinion of the medical community. It's like the old thing about global warming, yeah? You might find a scientist, an environmental scientist, that says, nah, it's all made up. Buy yourself a Lamborghini, it's fine. It's the 99% or 99.5 or whatever it is percent of scientists that are of the contrary to that. That's why we listen to them, okay? Because it's the vast, overwhelming majority of scientific expert opinion that says that there's a problem with climate change. The fact that you've managed to find one individual that on a blog or whatever has decided something different, and they're a scientist, doesn't mean to say that they're right when everybody else is wrong. I mean, that's quite a position when you think about it, isn't it? This individual was right when every other person was wrong. Imagine that again, a court of law. 100 witnesses. 99 of them said they saw A attack B or whatever. One person says, no, B attacked A. You go, they must be right. That one person must be right because they're going against what the mainstream wants you to believe. nonsense, isn't it? You go, well, 99 people, probably right in fairness of it. One person, I don't know what they saw or what they were thinking, but that's it. So be careful with that one. Be careful with these doctors in general. There's one I was watching the other day. He was talking about COVID, I think. It must have been COVID. And so I Googled him. Googled him. And he was talking about being a surgeon or what have you. And it turned out that he wasn't a surgeon. He'd done sort of well, depends what you mean by surgeon. Yeah. So if I say a surgeon to you, you probably think they're going to open you up and fiddle around with your guts. He had done surgical procedures, but that kind of removing warts and stuff, that's not quite the same thing as open heart surgery. So he was really trying to like egg his case and say, hey, I'm a surgeon and I don't believe in masks or whatever the heck it was. But when you do some research on him, you find out that his credentials are quite limited in that sense, but also that he was not being open and honest about what he was. Okay, he was being, like I said earlier, I'm a doctor of economics, not a doctor of medicine. Open and honest about what it was. If I walked around just saying I'm a doctor in that sense, you could easily think, that I was talking from a medical perspective. Is why when I go to hospital, they call me Brian. They don't call me doctor or Mr. Mills. They call me Mr. Mills sometimes. Because it's the wrong context for it. Okay, so we might do another video actually on titles and stuff. That could be quite interesting. So basically, though, have a little think about the source and the credibility of it, and don't be put off by the fact that they are they have some sort of qualifications and background. Quite a few people in Hitler's cabinet had degrees and higher degrees. It doesn't make you infallible. Doesn't mean that you're right. It also doesn't mean you're not just a crank. Okay. So watch that one. Be careful with that one. Particularly if it's outside of the National Health Service. I'm not saying this as some sort of crazy patriot, as it were. What I'm saying is the National Health Service is quite rigorous in terms of firing people if they're talking nonsense. Other countries have more open systems, okay, perhaps more liberal systems, but in those systems, you can claim to be something you're not more easily. Okay, so do be careful with that one. So overall, so this has gone on quite a bit. There's kind of quite a few things to cover, really, isn't there? But Google before you share is probably the answer. Google before you share. Check more than one site. Don't be afraid of the mainstream. Okay, dig around in the mainstream, see what you can find. All right, and to be honest with you, I've been really fortunate in my life. I've met everybody from politicians to billionaires to professors to scores of people. And one of the things that I've realized in all of that is that they're all human. They really are, just like me and you, really fallible. Just like I'm doing this video, they often stutter. They're just really normal people like me and you. And they ain't smart enough to organise a conspiracy. There's no conspiracy because simply they aren't smart enough. However, just like me and you, they look after themselves a little bit sometimes, all right? So capitalism allows them to do that as well. So, yeah, I'm not going to knock capitalism a little bit there. It allows you to do that. I think if you read Animal Farm, you look at sort of Soviet Russia, communism allowed them to do that as well. Okay, you feather your own nest a little bit, make sure you're all right a little bit. That's probably the only conspiracy there is. But it's like I said, it's not one that is quite that sophisticated. It really is just persuading people to vote against tax rises for you. That's about as sophisticated as it gets. Okay, so hope that's been of some interest or somehow. I do really apologise for the length of it, but I'll see if I can do a couple hours. All right, so yeah, keep an open mind, but also do your own Googling. And do think about the credibility of the source. Really, really think about the credibility of the source. What is their message? Google the Googler, if you like. So Google it, then check it up, and then check it up again. Okay, and find out a little bit about them. All right. So some of you are spoiled. I've got a picture of Sheikh of they are. So credibility of Brian here. He's a left-wing communist lunatic. No, actually, I'm just of an age where that poster sort of stems from my youth a little bit, and I like the iconography of it. I also teach marketing and brands and images, and my golly, there you go, that's a brand for you. Okay, so that's why it's there. So that's quite an interesting one. I'm an economist as well, and Karl Marx said we're all apologists for capitalism. So another one as well. We can discuss economics another day, right? Lovely to speak to you, and I hope this has been of some fun and some interest, and perhaps not, but you could just stop the video anytime. Okay, have fun.